Chancellor Carrell, I am so pleased to welcome you today to the IngeniousU community.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Now, our guests, our listeners, I should say, always like to know a little something about our guests, the leadership journey, and so on. And so, why don't we start with that? Could you share your leadership journey with us and specifically any pivotal moments, influences, experiences that shaped your path to becoming the chancellor of University of Minnesota Rochester?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, I think, there were great teachers in my childhood, and I became a very curious person and wanted to learn. I loved National Geographic when it arrived in my rural Southern Indiana mailbox. And that passion for learning really has been a delightful part of how I move from one project to the next, or a role here to a role there. I've loved adventure, and an adventure as a teacher and counselor in a remote Alaskan village early in my career really taught me so much. It taught me to listen to the learner and not assume I know how to teach anything. And those lessons and that adventure, I think, have informed my leadership journey all the way through. And that's been kind of a thread that the learners have been my mentor. So what I thought was important to teach, or ways I thought we might approach teaching, have been shaped and reshaped and redesigned again and again and again in response to learners and what they need to continue to progress. So I would put them as the top mentors, but of course, there have been lots of wonderful colleagues along the way as well. So I'm grateful for the whole experience as an educator, and really continue to be surprised daily at the role that I have, and the honor of it, of being part of students' journeys. So that is a summary of a lot of years.
Thank you for that. I'm curious, how did you wind up in a rural Alaskan village?
Well, I had done a little study abroad in college, and then was teaching in my hometown high school, had replaced my mentor, the guru of theater and speech in my high school. And I think most folks expected I would stay there and be the next in line for her role. But after a year or two, and maybe it was that freshman grammar class I had to teach with 37 young men. But after a year or two, I just had a thirst for adventure. And I ultimately resigned, which was hard, and bought a little truck and packed my belongings and drove the Alcan. I wanted an adventure and had heard stories of teachers in the Arctic and thought I could pursue that. It was a good decision, yet took some courage, and maybe that's a theme for me as well.
Yeah, I would say that took a lot of courage to do something like that, to step away from something that was safe and known to the great unknown. And I have this visual image of you driving this truck.
Oh my goodness, it was so beautiful. And I know many people have made that drive, but just each turn was like, another National Geographic photography expedition. And I knew that adventure was waiting. I had no idea the extent to which I would transform as a person and as an educator, and what I would learn from my students there.
Yeah, wow. Well, that segues nicely to my question about your leadership strengths and superpower, because I think we're already getting a little sense as to who you are as a leader. But as you know, every leader has their own set of strengths that define how they show up each day. And I like to believe each leader has a superpower of one kind or another. So, what would you say is your leadership superpower, and how do you leverage it in your role as chancellor?
I think it's accurate to say I am a true believer in the transformative power of learning. And because of that deep conviction of what learning can do for individual lives and for humanity, I am able to persevere through things that might be described as challenging or hardships or whatever. Yeah. And I know that there is delayed gratification or learning that has to happen so we can pivot or whatever, but it's really that true believer self that has no trouble persevering because I am so convinced of the value of what we do, even in the current context that has new kinds of challenges. I know that the work itself is noble. The work that our faculty and staff are doing and the potential impact on students' lives, their impact on us, and the permanent reverberations that are possible, those echoes through the future, even after we're done with our work. And I think that has been powerful for me. And I think many educators share that conviction. So it's not a novel superpower, but it certainly has fueled me.
So, how does that show up, or what does that look like? If I were interviewing people who work closely with you, for example, how would they describe you as a leader? What would they experience in terms of what it feels like to have you as a leader?
Maybe that's the next podcast, then you can do an accuracy check. I'm a listener. So I probe and reflect and get as many perspectives as possible and often find some potential creative way to move forward or through or around that whole navigation when we're innovating. And I hope that the grounding values of our campus, which include community and developing human potential, are values I lead in interacting with colleagues and students, and that the experience of working with me is probably coming to understand that I am listening very deeply and integrating what is being shared and just working to mine the collective wisdom.
Thank you for that. Now, you mentioned innovation. You are working in a campus, the existence of which comes from the innovative spirit and impulse, if you will. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about how a leader, chancellor in this case, you and your team, how do you balance the need for ongoing innovation with the equally important need to honor and preserve those things that are good about academic tradition?
This is a conversation we have almost every day. And what it comes down to for us is prioritizing and reprioritizing all day long, right? As a startup campus, we're small, we're scrappy, and what we want to preserve and what we want to change is a constant process of discernment. I think that overall in higher education, there's much more protecting and preserving. And so we don't see that as our primary focus. And as a result of wanting to follow the evidence about how students learn and develop, we have a keen appetite to bring about change and to lead innovation, always when it's in service to student learning and development. So you can see which way we lean here at the University of Minnesota Rochester, and that is toward change. Now, if the evidence says there's a practice that some may think of as traditional that is effective in generating student learning and development, we're going to be for it, right? But we're always looking for the evidence. And our faculty here do their primary research on student learning and development. So our students are participants. It's a living laboratory. And when we find something that works, I call them goodies, we distribute the goodies to everyone, right? So whether that goodie is something that is done traditionally in higher ed or something new is really irrelevant if the evidence points the way.
What about resistance to change? Is that something you have faced there or elsewhere? And if so, how do you deal with it?
Yes, I remember the first time I read the book, The Real Reason People Won't Change. And I thought, as is my habit, first, how does this apply to me? Where am I resistant and why? But the perspective that universities are first and foremost about learning and that we should apply learning to ourselves and so that we will be constantly evolving helps us as a culture that is all about transformation and change. Resistance to change, of course, each of us, all of us, right? One of the things we did early on at UMR was a program review of other newer campuses, and there are very few, right? Especially in public higher education. But as we look to those that were around 50 or 60 years old, we heard a similar tale across these campuses. And that is that the original innovators became the blockade to change. They became the resistors because in whatever year it was, they defined innovation and led innovation with positive impact, and it was glorious. And then they became stuck there in thinking, oh, there is one way to do this, and we're going to sustain it. So we have been keenly aware of that, hyper conscious, like where is it we're protecting something? Does the evidence still show us that that early practice is still effective with students or not? Prior to being here, I was at another campus, campus I love very much, and was there for 23 years. And we did gen ed reform, and I think across higher ed, gen ed reforms are known to be contentious. Ours had needed to be changed for 4 decades, so we've gone through 4 accreditation cycles before we finally got to the change. But the process of bringing about that change, which encountered much resistance, what became extraordinarily joyful as we had a multidisciplinary team and we created a communication strategy of meeting with and listening to every single department or sub-department unit in the university. And we had an open document. I call them drafty drafts. And as we would make each visit and listen, we would edit the document to demonstrate that we had heard and integrated something that had been shared in that meeting. And so the document was living and breathing, and individuals could see their contributions. And when the contributions were not integrated, we would talk about why. And share that information. And that was an extensive listening process. And I had a dream team that I was gifted to be a part of. And that was one strategy for managing through resistance to change and getting forward with a new way of doing general education that would be more beneficial to students. Also, a part of that change management strategy and dealing with resistance was coupling the statistics about where students fell down in their learning and development, where they encountered barriers, with stories. So we would, it's painful, but showcase a few classes that were blockades to student progress. And we'd have a student who had experienced that talk about their experience. So the story with the evidence, the living, breathing person with the stat was another technique. And so the process of listening and of sharing stories and of following the evidence is probably kind of a repetitive theme for me and all of our teams here at UMR now as we work toward continual learning, transformation, adaptation, and innovation.
Yeah, wow, what a powerful approach you've just described. And I want to go back to something you said previously about how success is sometimes this isn't how you said it, but in my words, I've seen that where success can be an incredibly powerful barrier to change, right? Because oftentimes the things that get you where you are the things you attribute your success to, and the resistance to letting go of that can be really powerful. So
yes, I think this is where in higher education, looking at ourselves, with eyes wide open is really helpful. So generally, in higher ed, we are research advocates, right? We value research, we seek research funding, we want new discoveries, and we teach people how to do research, all of that. And yet, we do not apply research results about how people learn and develop to our own practice systemically and at scale. We don't do it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be lecturing anymore, right? It's just a simple one. So I think that applying the research results is what will keep us moving forward if we feel resistance because we think past success is what is generating our value and worth professionally or personally or both, then that can become a blockade. But if we look at fresh evidence and see that change is needed, that can also fuel our value personally and professionally because we know we're choosing to do what is best for student learning and development. So, there really is underlying psychological piece to the reasons that people don't change or that they protect instead of adapting. And I think having a research value and seeing it as applicable to our own practice in higher ed is really a critical turning point, as is working across disciplines. That is critical as well.
Yeah, indeed. Now, I want to give you a chance to tell our listeners a bit more about the University of Minnesota Rochester, and I'm going to give you a context for doing that. Your work emphasizes human communication as a catalyst for transformation, and we're already hearing that through the stories and what you're sharing with us. So, how have you applied this principle to foster innovation and well-being at UMR? And maybe you can start by telling us a little bit more about UMR, what makes it unique, and then how you have brought your academic emphasis to your work there.
Well, UMR is quite a special place, and I know most leaders think that about their place, but this is in part because citizen advocates in Rochester, Minnesota, the home of Mayo Clinic, worked for decades to bring a University of Minnesota campus to this community. And the matriarch who led that effort is 94 now and texts me most days to share her thoughts about what's happening. But those citizen advocates lived a set of values that we inherited as a campus. And this is a community where research, innovation, and compassion and healing are a part of the fabric, and that we are integrated into the downtown in that environment. This is America's City for Health, set up some of the ways we became distinctive. So this campus launched in 2009, so we're very young. And the first chancellor, Stephen Lemkool, had quite the adventurous task in front of him with a few colleagues and those citizen advocates in our University of Minnesota system and others. He led the planning to a point of two arenas of distinctiveness. First is that our faculty, regardless of discipline, would do their primary research on student learning and development. That is novel in the country, if not the world. We've been looking for a sister campus in terms of the research focus and have not found one across this planet. That set up a culture where we attract people who love to learn, who love to teach, who are very student focused, and help promulgate us into this innovative campus that we are, and a campus that can be evidence-based. The other arena of distinctiveness that Steve Lemkool and the early group led us to was a focus on health sciences. So there are already regional comprehensives in our part of Minnesota, and we needed a distinctiveness. And of course, it makes sense with Mayo Clinic just steps away, and with the dire healthcare workforce needs that continue to guide us and call to our students. So those two pieces set us apart and set us up for success. We would say now that at UMR, we have three principles. Students are at the center, research informs practice, and partners make it possible. They're all connected to each other. So all of us would say students are at the center, of course. But when we also say research informs practice, we're saying whatever the evidence tells us is good for students, we're going to choose. And when we got to the part about partners, we found that there is an expertise we bring and a passion for student learning and development, and an expertise we do not bring as educators that has to do with things like building maintenance and sports and even providing healthcare. So there are partners who are experts in those areas. And so we partner for recreation, for the health services for our students, for the development of our buildings. We just remodeled a DoubleTree Hotel into our Student Life Center, for example. Partnerships really matter to keep us focused on what we see as the reason we exist as a university. Following the evidence has led us to a wonderful outcome, and that is that we have no so-called achievement gap. So regardless of a student's background, there are similar completion outcomes. And that's about the evidence. It's also about striving students who work really hard in an academically rigorous program. But that is an outcome we wish to sustain with 2/3 of our students underrepresented. Many of them come from communities that are underserved in terms of healthcare, and the possibility that they might go back and affect health outcomes also keeps us motivated here. So we're a growing campus, started the first class graduating in 2013 with 52 souls. We'll be around 1,100 in the fall. And that is still a small campus, but it's a steep growth curve. And I could go on and on and on. I know there was a part B to your question about how I bring my academic discipline to my work, but maybe I should take a breath.
Well, and I actually had wanted to ask you, so I may ask you to dive deeper on what you were just talking about, because under your leadership, UMR has achieved significant enrollment growth and equity advancement in terms of attainment. And so I was curious what specific kinds of things you've done to bring that about, to achieve the outcomes you just talked about. Are there one or two strategies
Yes,
that...
I mean, this
Yeah, go
is
ahead.
momentum from the citizen advocates and the values they lived, and the first leader,
Uh-huh.
Stephen Lemkool, and what they set up together as the distinctiveness, particularly that we would follow the evidence. So the evidence shows, and I can name some of these practices. One of them is that our students each have a student success coach, a life coach, who is with them from beginning to end. And number one comment in alumni surveys, can my coach come with me to med school or wherever I'm going? The answer is no. But rather than an advising department and a career services and on, it's a human being. And there's a relationship, and it traverses the years of school as the student explores career options, makes academic choices, plans a capstone, and develops as a human being, typically from the age of 18 to 21. So those success coaches or life coaches are one of the evidence-based practices. Another is something we call the Just Ask. These are faculty-student interaction stations. We have a multidisciplinary team of faculty out and available to students throughout the day. The instruction is flipped and active, not lecture-based. And so students need to prepare for class to engage in an inductive problem kind of approach with their classmates. You know, it's team-based. So they need access sometimes to professors. And we have many first generation students, and we know that office hours are a barrier. So this Just Ask faculty student interaction station, we have multiple of those across the campus, has proved to be one of the evidence-based practices. And again, it's relationship-based, that the students are able to interact casually and outside of the classroom with their faculty members. Those are two in a long list. I might say one more, and that is the structure of the curriculum, which includes a capstone year. So the first 2 years, not a whole lot of choice, rigorous, sets a student up for any career in health virtually. And then as they make their final decision, they can specialize in that capstone year, which is completely individually planned. And that allows us to integrate work-based learning, community engaged learning, and other kinds of high impact practices. I want to keep going. Living learning community is another one. And the reason I'm going to do that one more, even though I said I'd stop after 3, is the living learning communities. We piloted this starting in 2017, and the results over a couple of years were higher GPA, stronger report of well-being, mental health, and timely completion. And so now that was a goodie we discovered. Now all first-year students get the goodie, and all first-year students are in living learning communities. So the list goes on, but the process is the same. Discerning what works and putting it in place for everyone, and then continuing to track and assess to make sure it keeps working. And then our amazing faculty and success coaches and staff who do that adaptation as we go. It's a high commitment approach to student learning and development. And oh my, the payoffs when we see so many students graduating and going on, doing that in a timely way when perhaps demographically one would predict otherwise. It's very gratifying. And we look back constantly to the citizen advocates and the early leaders as to why we're where we are.
Yeah. What is your graduation rate?
Last year, the students who graduated, 20% finished in 3 years. And of those who were graduating, we were 97% finishing in. So we have many programs where that senior year is used as the first year of a graduate or professional degree, and that transfer process affects our official IPEDS numbers, but we're not really losing the students. We're supporting what is best for them. And so we accept.
Yeah.
Our first to second year retention is 86%.
Which is extraordinary, particularly considering the diverse range of students that you enroll.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and you're mentioning so many of those high impact practices that have proven time and again to do the exact kind of thing that you're seeing. And I'm amazed that more campuses, and I don't know why. I think it takes, you obviously had the opportunity there through your citizen advocates and the opportunity to build very intentionally an experience to ensure that those practices would go deep in the probably the culture of the place. That doesn't happen, right? At schools that have been around for a long time. Yeah.
Right. We were gifted with a blank canvas. And so, while we are proud of our student outcomes and our students and our innovative faculty, we know that we are very lonely in the club of who gets a blank canvas, right? Only one other new public university in this century so far. And we wanted to make the most of that gift. So we do seek to be a demonstration case with our faculty research, able to demonstrate and discern which of the practices have a significant impact that drive that equity outcome. And we know that on other campuses it would be a change management endeavor to move to having the provision of the goodies, the high impact evidence-based practices for all students. And yet it is possible. The painful part is saying no to some other things so that the high impact practices can be afforded. And that is a culture shift, which needs to be driven by a structural change. So bringing me to the structure of our academic department, it is multidisciplinary, the Center for Learning Innovation. So since day one, the philosopher is seated next to the chemist, and they think about the curriculum from the student's point of view and not from their subspecialty within a discipline point of view. And that has made so much difference. The structure of the leadership team is also designed for collaboration. We work hard to be matrixed and connected. And this is maybe getting to the communication question, structuring so that frequent communication contextualized by authentic relationship is our standard mode of operation that keeps us innovative and sharp and being accountable to each other for looking at the evidence.
So you're speaking about your own background, research, and expertise in human communication as a catalyst for transformation. Now, is that something that was part and parcel of UMR when it was founded, or is this something you have further teased out, if you will, in the way you lead?
Well, it came with me. I wouldn't say, oh, it wasn't here before. Early in my time here as vice chancellor, to Chancellor Steve Lemkohl, the founding chancellor, I was in a meeting with some researchers and health professionals at Mayo, and I wasn't following the conversation very well. I couldn't figure out why I was there, given that I had no expertise in this specific subject matter at hand. And so after a while of, working through my imposter syndrome, I disassociated a bit, and my mind just started doing what it does, which is analyzing the interaction pattern in the room, figuring out the power dynamics and where the creativity was sparking and where it wasn't and all of that. And I came home that day discouraged and shared it with my husband. And, his observation was, hey, that's what you do. And they hired you, so bring it. And that gave me the confidence. And also, it's a bit of gall, but, here I am. That's what I have. I want to give it fully, and others will bring other kinds of strengths and give those, and together we'll be whole. So I do default to that disciplinary lens, and I do think it's been a contribution, and that it can't be the only contribution. We need the whole community, the whole team. So.
Yeah, well, your husband gave you good advice, and I would love to have you in a room. Because I bet you see things that everybody else misses in terms of that lens. And boy, today, that is such a critically important skill. So, yeah.
I often listen for what is not being said.
Yeah.
What is not being asked, what will not be broached. And it reveals more than what is being said directly. It's been very, very helpful to discernment.
So this may be not a great question, but well, no, because I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, wow, that is, that is so important. And how many leaders, and I'm just wondering, to what extent is this gender influenced in terms of how you lead? And not to stereotype, but I've had so much experience with so many male leaders who are so busy talking and taking up the air in the room that we don't get to the heart of whatever it is that we're trying to address. So I don't know. I'm curious if you have an opinion. Is which
overall, in my 40 years now of higher education work, I've seen a shift in leadership generally to becoming more collaborative, that there's a broad recognition that one person doesn't have insight way beyond what everybody else has or what they have together, right? That there is not one genius who's going to come up with the solution just sitting in their office, pondering the universe. Instead, through interaction, we're going to stumble and find our way to a collective idea that moves us in the direction of a solution, maybe, right? So I think there's just been a change overall, less toward hierarchy, more toward relationship, and a recognition of the value of all the perspectives, and then that leads to a need to be collaborative. And I think that a collaborative team is the future of higher education leadership, that individuals and the expectations for all the ways they will be exemplary may not be realistic.
I hope that you're right. The research, the data on the impact of diverse leadership is enormous. It's hard to refute. And yet sometimes I look around and I feel like we're going backwards when I look at what's happening in the world. But we won't go there today in this conversation. I did want to circle back and ask you about the College in Three initiative, something you're co-leading, the College in Three Exchange to design accelerated degree programs. So tell us a little bit more about this.
Yes, well, it was a brainstorm during the pandemic. There was a little window right before Delta where we could get together, and our faculty did a design sprint and cooked up this marvelous prototype. The aspiration was to tackle the two top challenges in higher education. And that is, first, that it costs so much, and that leaves people out, leaves people behind who have a lot they would like to learn and contribute. So decreasing the cost, but then while simultaneously improving the outcomes, right? So we were working toward a design that could do both, so that all the evidence-based practice that we know would be embedded in the design. We'd be problem-based. This prototype was 7-week blocks around a problem with a interdisciplinary integrated project across those. And with that first design, we had 120 credits and the same classes that a student in the traditional, still very new, 4-year degree had in health sciences, Bachelor of Science in Health Sciences. And this came out of my interaction and work with Bob Zemsky, who many years before had promoted the idea of 3-year degrees. They were looking at what gen ed actually accomplished, or electives, and it was a flash. And then the response nationally was, oh, the accreditors would be in the way, would not go for that. And then the flash was gone. I, talked Bob into, he would say, revisiting that and bringing the evidence-based practice lens. So we had a pilot here. We learned a lot, but as far as the College in Three Exchange now, that is a nonprofit. And Madeline Green, who used to be with ACE, is the executive director of that. We have nearly 50 campuses now across the country who are designing, launching, and assessing 3-year programs. And there are a variety of designs. Ours was different than most. There are a variety of ways to get to a shorter degree that then costs students less. But what we advocate for here is that shorter and better. So it takes the redesign with the evidence-based practice. So College in Three Exchange is going strong. There's a community of practice that meets monthly. We'll host the 3rd annual convening here in June, and there's great momentum here. And the reason we know that, besides the increasing number of campuses, is that the accreditors have opened the door, including our Higher Learning Commission here in our region, and that's 1,000 campuses, but several other accreditors as well, have opened the door to reduced credit baccalaureates. But the idea is not reduced substance or reduced value, but instead designs that still are the catalyst for transformative learning that move students, learners through to career launch sooner and for less costs.
Yeah, I think it's a great initiative. And I know NECHI, the New England Accreditation Association, has this on their radar. And
that's, yes.
So,
and Northwest Commission and Middle States, there's real momentum happening. And here we've transitioned from the pilot to a broader framing called Get Forward Faster. But we really urge everyone designing these kinds of programs to attend to student well-being. Flourishing during college is a good predictor of flourishing for the rest of life, and we can't set it aside, even if we're going a little faster than has been the tradition.
Yeah, boy, good for you. So that's a really important development. So let me
It's
sort
fun. It's just
yeah,
fun.
I can tell you're the innovation and is obviously part and parcel of what gives you enjoyment, maybe
Mhm.
meaning in the role. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
the creativity.
so let me ask you a related question here. So as you've already pointed out, UMR has been recognized for closing equity gaps in education. You know well the kind of environment we're currently in terms of governmental pushbacks and changes. Just today, I believe, they announced significant, massive cuts in the DOE. So I'm curious if you have an opinion as a leader, how colleges and universities should be navigating the current climate in light of these actions pertaining to equity, supporting equity, DEI. I mean, do you have any? I'm sure you have some thoughts. You've probably talked to your colleagues.
Oh, yes. A couple thoughts. First is a way of framing our commitments and values and what we do. And perhaps we could have been better in the past in how we communicate what we do. The way I say it now is when we admit, we commit. So if a student is deemed admissible here, we as educators have a moral obligation and a privilege to do everything possible to help each of those admitted students succeed. And that means learn deeply, develop and grow and be well, launch careers, complete in a timely way and launch careers, and have the habits of mind and heart to flourish, making a difference and making a living. But when we admit, we commit. So any student who is admitted will get the best that we can bring for them, and we'll use the evidence for that. That's always been true. It continues to be true. And then in terms of leadership and navigation, there's so much ambiguity. And we find, a recent memory, the pandemic and navigating the pandemic, so much of that was about ambiguity. And what we know today is different tomorrow. And we've made a decision and started an implementation. And now we pivot. Pandemic watchword, right? And now many are saying, oh, this feels like that because there's so much ambiguity. But there's one key difference. And I think if we can embrace that difference, we will manage. And that difference is that in the pandemic, we were forced to be isolated from one another. But in the current context, where there is also ambiguity, we have the resumed privilege of community, being together with people who share our values, like the importance of human potential, right, and developing it, and drawing strength from that community that is doing this work to educate and finding ways to be together and to draw strength and to remind ourselves of purpose will give us the strength to keep going and keep adapting and keeping our eyes on what's most important. So that's not specific because we can't be specific with the ambiguity, but there is this key difference. We made it through the pandemic and an enterprise, higher education, and there will be a future state. And we draw on the strength that is made possible from a community of educators. I think that when we are in that future state, we will be different, but we will still be contributing to the common good.
That's a very constructive way to frame it and helpful, I think, not only for those of us who are leading, but also for our communities. It never hurts, does it, to remind people of where we've been in terms of, framing where we're going. So thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you a little bit more about your global experience. We talked about your time in Alaska, but I understand that you also have had some other experiences globally, such as contributing to the launch of a university in Oman. So, how do these experiences shape the way you lead?
Yeah, I think it's kind of both directions. So that that love of learning and curiosity that developed in me as a child stayed around, stayed with me when opportunities would come up, or maybe sometimes I created them, but I would raise my hand or explore. Um, Finding that immersion in a context where I am a stranger, where I don't know what to do next, is not, default how you shake hands even, or say hello or start a conversation. I mean, just getting into an environment where everything is questioned is so energizing and refreshing and such a catalyst for growth. So as the opportunities emerged or I could create them, I have chosen to do that several times in my life in really what I guess some people think of as dramatic ways, right? So I was teaching intercultural communication at my previous institution and really felt the need over years to have my students have that kind of experience, to really be shaken that if you are in a place where everyone is very much like you, it may be harder to develop some of the skills for intercultural communication that we see as so important for the future of humanity, right? So by and by, created this experience to take my intercultural communication students to live with a remote tribe in the Amazon rainforest for a short period of time, 3 weeks. It did feel longer. The spiders were large, but all of the students, and I studied them as we did this, all of the students reported very specific ways in which that learning experience was transformative. And it's just become a habit of mine to look for ways to immerse in being a novice again, and seeing the value in how others do something that you know nothing about. It's the adventure of higher education generally, is just keep learning. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's there's so many places I could go with that, but we're getting to the end of our time. So I'll have to hold that for another conversation. So I have two questions I want to close with. The first has to do with any advice you might have, particularly for women who are aspiring to leadership positions, and maybe any lessons you've learned that you would want to pass along to them.
Some of the advice, from my lived experience might not be relevant for everybody. But being a professor, I had this profound privilege of doing research on things that fascinated me. Taking the next step every time, whatever that decision is about a role or project, right? But taking that next step based on a pull to something that matters a whole lot or that is evoking deep curiosity. I think that it has for me been good guidance as well. What should I do next? This thing looks shiny and other people might want me to do it, but what is really tugging at my curiosity or my passion to make an impact? Or I think just take the very next step rather than planning out the entire thing. I'll do this for 3 years and then So yes, from my experience, that would be advice, though I'm very much aware that it might not be relevant for everyone. Depends on your situation, of course.
Yeah, well, thank you. Our signature question, we ask this of everybody who comes on the podcast. And this season, we're talking only to women leaders. So I'm framing it in that light. So, as a woman leading in higher education today, what do you believe is your most important contribution to the future of the sector? And how do you hope your leadership will inspire the next generation of women leaders?
Oh, I hope my contribution includes encouraging professors and student development staff and all of my colleagues to continue to believe in the extraordinary impact and purpose of the work that we do. And I do often see my role as an encourager, and I believe that we can forget sometimes our reason for being, which is to develop human potential. Wow. If I were talking to my little girl self and said that this is what you're going to get to do later, I think I would have been very, very happy. So I would just want to serve an encouraging function. And maybe some of that is in what the UMR campus community is able to do as they work together to use evidence to inform practice. It's again a gift that we got to start from scratch, but look what is possible when people work together around common values. And hopefully UMR as a demonstration case also serves an encouraging function to all leaders, including women leaders, that the impact when one person is educated, you know, the stories, we all live them, observe them, you know, journey next to learners, and we've got to keep telling ourselves those stories every day to keep encouraging ourselves so we have both the stamina and grace to continue.
Yeah. Well, I know from what I've heard about you, people who know you, you are already living into that legacy of encouraging and lifting others up and building their potential. So thank you for your leadership. And thank you so much, Lori, for your time today. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
Well, thank you for being interested and for your good questions. And I enjoyed myself too. I hope that's okay.
Absolutely. So, all
All right.
right. All good wishes to you.